Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to part 19 of Quranic Contemplations, where we contemplate selected verses of the Quran. And in this episode, we're going to be looking at the 19th juz of the Quran, inshallah, starting with the 60th verse from Surah Al-Furqan, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about those who are told to prostrate, who are from the disbelievers, and they will be told, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ اسْجُدُوا لِلرَّحْمَنِ قَالُوا وَمَا الرَّحْمَنُ أَنَسْجُدُ لِمَا تَأْمُرُنَا وَزَادَهُمْ نُفُورًا. That when they're told to prostrate to the Most Merciful, they will say, what is the Most Merciful? Should we prostrate to that which you order us? And it increases them in aversion. So they won't prostrate to Ar-Rahman. Now, why is the word Ar-Rahman mentioned here? Why is this name of Allah used? Why didn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just say, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ اسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ, when they're told to prostrate to Allah? Why is the word explicitly used here and not just Allah, the name Allah used? Why is Ar-Rahman specifically used? And from the reasons for this is because in this surah, after that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly mentions some of His blessings and some of His mercies upon mankind. From them is the fact that He placed great stars in the sky. فِي السَّمَاءِ بُرُوجًا وَجَعَلَ فِيهَا سِرَاجًا وَقَمَرًا مُنِيرًا. And He placed amongst those things that He has decorated the skies with are a burning lamp, a sun, and a luminous moon, providing light and warmth. And also from the blessings which He has given us is that He has made the night and the day in succession for whoever desires to remember or desires gratitude. He has alternated the night and the day. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after mentioning the purposes of prostrating to Ar-Rahman, prostrating to the Most Merciful, which the disbelievers would question, why are we going to prostrate? Who is Ar-Rahman? Why are we prostrating to Him? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these verses describes and tells us about the immense mercies which He has bestowed upon us, from the sun and the moon and the stars, and the benefits of them, and also the benefits of the alternating of the night and the day. The second verse I want to go through is in Surah Al-Shu'ara, verses 52 and 61. In verse 52, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the story of Musa alayhi salam and how he left Egypt with Bani Israel, who were enslaved by Fir'aun. And he says to Musa, وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى أَنْ أَسْرِ بِعِبَادِي إِنَّكُمْ مُتَّبَعُونَ. He says, travel by night with my servants. Indeed, you will be pursued, you're going to be followed by Fir'aun. So he says, travel by night with my servants, bi'ibadi. In verse number 61, a few verses later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَمَّا تَرَأَى الْجَمْعَانِ قَالَ أَصْحَابُ مُوسَى. When the two companies saw one another, the companions of Musa alayhi salam, they said, so this is when they were at the sea, and the army of Fir'aun was coming, and the sea was in front of Musa and Bani Israel. And Bani Israel were between the sea and between the army of Fir'aun. The companions of Musa alayhi salam, meaning Bani Israel, they said, Inna la mudrakun. Verily, we're going to be overtaken, we're going to basically die, we're going to be destroyed. Now the question is, it's only a few verses later, but why in the first example, in the first verse that we mentioned, why are they described, why are they explicitly described as ibadi, my servants, Allah's servants? Whereas in the next verse, in this verse, verse 61, the same people, it's the same group of people. They're still Bani Israel. They're still the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why does Allah describe them as Ashabu Musa, the companions of Musa? Why is there a difference between the way Allah describes them? The reason why is because when Musa alayhi salam saves them and they leave Egypt, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing them in an honorable way because He's helping them, protecting them, taking care of them. And so He describes them explicitly as ibadi, my slaves, my servants. In this verse, The people of Bani Israel, the companions of Musa, as they described here, are called this because when they approached the sea, when they saw the sea in front of them and they saw Fir'aun and his army behind, they didn't put their trust in Allah Azza wa Jal. They lost faith. They lost their trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they lost their belief that Allah will save them. And so because they lost faith in Allah Azza wa Jal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loses and removes the most honorable title that a person could be given, which is being a slave of Allah Azza wa Jal, and instead he associates them with Musa, because he doesn't want anything to do with them now, because what they said was something which showed their lack of faith in Iman and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, Ashab Musa, they're now Ashab Musa, the companions of Musa alayhi salam, because they're saying, Inna la mudrakun, we're going to be destroyed, we're going to be overtaken. Meaning no one's going to be able to help us. They've lost their faith in Allah, so Allah likewise doesn't give them the honorable status of calling them my slaves, the slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third verse I want to go through is in Surah Naml, verse number 18, where Sulaiman alayhi salam was traveling with his huge army, and he came upon a valley of ants. And one of the ants said, قالت النملة يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم. He told the rest of the ants, enter your dwellings, just in case you are crushed by Sulaiman and his soldiers without them knowing. And I've highlighted here قالت نملة, an ant said. And of course, like I mentioned before, there are different forms of the verb depending on if you're speaking to a woman or a man, if it's referring to a masculine or a feminine. And we said that the general term, the general form that is used, even in English and even in other languages, you're going to use the male form as a general rule, as a general principle. For example, for an example that you may be using, you're going to use the masculine form. That's what's going to be used. In this case, explicitly, the feminine version is used. And why this is the case is because it has been discovered that the worker ants that actually do the work, they are in fact feminine. And this is what they've discovered in science and from scientific research today. Over 1400 years ago, the Messenger of Allah ﷺ could not have possibly known that the ant is feminine. And this shows us that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who sends down revelation, and the Quran isn't something which the Messenger of Allah made up, but it is in fact from the speech of Allah Azza wa Jal. There was no need and there was no reason for the Messenger of Allah to just all of a sudden use the feminine form here. But the reason why is because Allah knew that the ants, of course, that work are feminine, just as science has proven today. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explicitly calls and describes the ant in this case as feminine and not masculine. Jazakumullah khair for listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.